Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Legendary Aspects. Today we're going to be going over a legendary aspect known as the aspect of the deflecting barrier. The aspect of the deflecting barrier is an odd one, and it's not one that I particularly like. I think it's kind of poopy, to be perfectly honest. But let's talk about what it does, and let's talk about what it could be good for. Now first off, let's just read it. It says, while you have a barrier active, so that's condition number 1. Your barrier must be active. There is a 7 to 13% chance to ignore incoming direct damage from distant enemies. Condition number 2. The monsters have to be distant. So in this particular case, what does distant mean? So if you ever are wondering what close and distant means, all you need to do is stand in the center of the Kyovashad waypoint. And if you stand in the center of the Kyovashad waypoint, you will have this nice, beautiful stone circle right here. This is basically what the barrier between close and distant is. So everything inside of the stone circle is considered to be close, and everything outside of the stone circle is considered to be distant. So this means that outside the stone circle, you're going to have any monster that hits you from outside of the stone circle has a 13% chance to basically just ignore that damage that's coming in. Now, the problem with this is that most monsters that try and beat the crap out of you are going to be in close range. It's been my experience that the majority of the monsters in the game are close range fighters and will run up on you and bop you in the head with their mace or hammer or whatever. And this means that the 13% chance to ignore incoming direct damage from distant enemies isn't really quite as useful as it would seem. On top of this, you also need to have a barrier active. Now, the one very useful scenario that I could see this coming in handy for is when those bone thrall ballistas that are hiding in the darkness, like just hiding in the darkness, and you walk into a room fresh, from a fight, and you don't have any like barriers or anything up. Your health is up full, but you're basically all your defenses are down. And the bone thrall ballista shoots at you from a distance, and that when they shoot at you from a distance, obviously you could potentially completely ignore that hit that's coming in from the bone thrall ballista. The problem with this is, however, is that you have to have a barrier active, and the chances of you having a barrier active at all times when not in combat is pretty slim. You can generally generate barriers almost infinitely depending on your character in combat, but outside of combat it's a little bit more difficult to keep that barrier up permanently. So when you walk into a room and you're a fresh little fighter with no damage reduction buffs up and everything, and the bone thrall ballista just fires at you from a distance, you're not going to even have any percent chance to dodge it because, well, the barrier isn't active. I think one thing I would like to see this aspect changed is that maybe just remove that barrier aspect of it. Maybe instead of, and I know they want to have a barrier like component, maybe instead of it being a 13% chance to ignore incoming direct damage when a barrier is active, let's make it something like this. It's a 13% chance to ignore incoming damage from a distant monster, and double this chance if a barrier is active. I think that would be better. First off, distant enemies are not really the biggest threat in this game. On top of that, ignoring direct damage from distant enemies isn't really a big deal, in my personal opinion. Even when it comes to damage modifiers, like for instance, when you're looking at a nice pair of pants and you might see something that says like damage reduction from close. Well, damage reduction from close is very nice because most monsters that are going to fight you are going to be in close range. However, when you see damage reduction from distant, I always like poo-poo that one. I don't like that one. I don't really care about damage reduction from distant because the majority of the time you're not going to be distant enough from the monsters for it to matter. So it's an oddity. It can come in useful on occasion. But I think the main problem with this particular aspect is just that, well, number one, it's competing with other defensive aspects, which could be much better. Number two, it doesn't really offer all that much in terms of like damage reduction or armor increase or anything like that. So it's in a very odd position of it's kind of a crappy aspect. Let's take a look real quick, though, on Diablo 4.life, and let's see where we could potentially get this. So if we wanted to get our hands on the Deflecting barrier, the Deflecting barrier is Pants on the Necromancer is your best bet for gambling. That is the highest probability. It is capable of being put on helmets, chest armor, pants, shield, and amulet. I think this one would be better if you could put it on boots. Boot slots generally tend to be used for less useful aspects. And I know that this one is technically a defensive aspect, but I feel like it would be better in the boot slot than it would be on the in any other slot, because there's just too many other good defensive aspects, like you know, aspect of might, aspect of disobedience. Got like my aspect of the frickin' berserking here with the 2068 berserking effect, which I really like, by the way. Gives me really nice fortify when I deal direct damage while I'm berserking, which is really great. There's tons of different defensive aspects that you can utilize, like for instance my Kathos aspect, which gives me 25% damage reduction as long as I'm standing within the earthquake. And you know, that works versus close and distant, because as long as I'm standing in the earthquake, it doesn't matter, right? And I can leap into a room. I can just leap in, and as soon as I leap in, I get an earthquake. And that's why I think that this one in particular just doesn't really have a lot of good uses. It's one of those ones that needs to be reworked. They've got to do a little bit of work to it. They've really got to work out this whole damage on Tuesdays bit. And this one has the whole damage on Tuesdays things going on. Not only does it require a barrier to be active, not only does it require that the monster be distant from you, but the monster has to be distant from you, and you have to have a barrier active at the same time. And two different, you know, like, just, I feel like both of the conditions on this make it mostly useless. And that's pretty much all I got to say about this one. It's kind of a poopity-poopity. It's a poopity-poopity. And then what happens if your barrier goes down? I guess you just lose the effect, huh? Which is why I think my suggestion of making it so it's 13% chance to ignore incoming direct damage from distant enemies without a barrier, and then double that percent to 26%, like, with the barrier. That would be more interesting to me. Anyway, as always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when we're just talking about an aspect of the deflecting barrier. And as always, keep watching.